Hi, I'm Brent Warner, and I was the horticulturist on the island for 30 years almost, and now I'm the executive director of Farmers Markets Canada. And there's two comments about labeling, and I would caution you on the labeling. While I agree 100% on inbound product, and we've got to see the Chinese label and all that, we have a catastrophe on our hands at a local level right now to deal with the labeling that's currently coming down the federal legislation pipe for nutritional labeling. So you have to be careful here in the local food economies. There's got to be some kind of a cutoff floor where local economies don't have to have every variety of sausage. For instance, as a butcher, if I make 74 varieties of sausage and have to pay $5,000 for each one to have the labeling nutritionally tested, it's not going to happen. Maple Leaf Foods now, they don't have a problem paying that kind of money, but your local butcher will. So be cognizant when you're talking about labeling. Yes, you need to have traceability, no question. Local or anywhere else, I got to know whose product is it. We need bilingual labeling in many parts of this country. But once you get beyond that, and you start talking about all these other add-ons that people want on the label, GMO labeling, I think most of our consumers, if they knew it was local, would figure out they could talk to the farmer about whether it was GMO product, and you probably know in most cases it's not. But just be careful on the labeling. Every time you demand something on a label, you're putting another local farmer out of business for it. So we've got to have a level of labeling in our communities across this country that we can support local farmers, not put them out of business.
I'm also wondering, Carolyn, can you say something to the effect of NAFTA and sort of the interplay? Because I think a lot of people are confused as to the role of trade agreements and how they impact us in being buy local and promote next.
Well, I was going to go firstly on the labeling piece, because one of the things about labeling is that it's only as good as the enforcement. And one of if there's not the resources to make sure that anybody can put anything on a label, and unless you've got the human resources in there to be able to check these things, that you end up back in the same boat with the Chinese stuff. And as we learned the hard way years ago on, the echinacea that had ephedrine in it, or the sleepy time tea that had Valium in it, that those would never be on the label, and people wondering why this stuff works so well. That it is a matter of truth as well. And when we were in the U.S., the FDA is able to check 1% of the stuff that's coming into the country, even in terms of pharmaceuticals. And so, in terms of counterfeit drugs, all of these things, that the labeling is one thing, and we're presuming everybody's telling the truth, but we actually do need to make sure that sometimes in public policy, the easiest thing is to say, here's what we do, and you pick labeling, but then you don't understand that it's going to be the small sausage producer that actually ends up being hurt by this, because some of the other players will put anything they want on it, and nobody will catch them. So, I think that's been my concern, I think, around the labeling piece. And even this morning at some wing, that again, even labels like organic, that there's some people who put organic on anything, spell it IQUE or something, and then makes everybody feel warm and fuzzy. But there's some pretty wonderful producers who do need some man-made fertilizer on it that is pesticide-free, and that we aren't even sure what these definitions mean. So I think that people are looking for pesticide-free. They should be able to find pesticide-free. And there may be some products that in this big cold country will need a little boost in some way that we've decided is healthy, but it doesn't meet the actual strict criteria of organic. So I am open to figuring it out. It's like we learned on natural health remedies that you can't actually, you're not allowed to make a health claim. We need labeling that says this has been traditionally used for this, or for thousands of years has been for that. That again, if we just are strict about labeling alone, we've got to back it up with the ability to make sure that there is truth in the label. So yeah.
I've got a question for you while you have the mic. So why is the government so anti putting this is on the label, this is produced with genetically modified product like they do in Europe? What is the reason that we don't do that?
I think it's Canadian, well, maybe Brent will help us with this, but certainly when I was on the health committee and we were looking at some of these things, I think it would be easier in Canada just because we're so prissy about whether the field next door stuff was drifting over or whether it got into a rail car that might have had GMO stuff in it. The tracking of it is extraordinarily difficult if you're going to tell the truth. And with GMO stuff, unlike what we can do on lots of other products, you cannot put a cornflake under a microscope and find out if it's GMO or not, because you actually have to know where it came from, right? So you have to be able to track it right from the field in order to be able to put that label. It might be easier in Canada, and what has been suggested is to, instead of to put a label that said this definitely doesn't have GMO in it, than for us to label the GMOs. So which is again coming towards the pesticide-free, the organic, the whatever, trying to find a label or a category of things in that way might be easier for us to enforce. Again, because we unfortunately are still importing 80% of our food from elsewhere. Is that about it? That again, I mean, we have trouble even putting labels on booze or anything else because of again, it may be international trade, but it's mainly just that people are uncomfortable with things that have a different set of rules in every country. Even for us as exporters of some of the good stuff that we make here, it is very hard for our exporters to have to meet a different rule in every country. So, but maybe on the NAFTA stuff, you guys would be better than I am.
There's a big lobby that would not like to see GMO on any label. Most of you in this room are aware of that. And they have a lot of money. On the other hand, it would be extremely difficult if you were a baker or a small-scale producer like that and were trying to source different products to make your product, and to find all the way back that entire chain to find out if you could certify. Yes, you could on a small scale, but it would take you a long time to do that and get all that certification. Most of our grain crops in this country are genetically, I prefer to say engineered and modified. We have genetically modified plant material since man stood upright and walked around the face of the earth. By that I mean we've done plant breeding. We've selected out the stronger plant, the prettier plant, whatever, over years. What we're doing now is engineering plants and putting fish genes into tomatoes so that they'll stay and not freeze in a frost. That's a whole different animal, and there is not a scientist on this planet that can tell you the exact outcome of where that's going to go. So I prefer to call them engineered plants. And the frankenfood thing might be a little extreme in some cases, but nobody can tell you that it actually is extreme. We don't know what a fish gene in a tomato will do to you heat enough for your entire lifetime. So I think there's a bunch of issues on the table. It's not cut and dried as to why. There's a lot of cost involved. Would be one issue, and I think there's a huge lobby pushing back against you to say, we don't want to tell you that that's in there because then you won't buy our product. And they've got a big lobby. So I don't know if we'll ever get there. But it would certainly hurt agriculture in this country. We would have to change our big grain industry because canola in this country is essentially all genetically modified.
But I think the point, and I don't want to make this an issue, but the point that I like to make is I think we should start listening to the people of this country and not to the lobbying group who like to stop this, because we will find out that 70% of probably of the products that we eat are already genetically modified.
I'm not arguing with you at all. I'm just trying to give you some information.
Yeah.
And you are correct. But be aware that a large part of our agriculture industry in this country, the grain industry, does not have a lot of choice when it comes to what they plant and how they make their living. So if you were to say they cannot grow GMO products, I wouldn't want to be saying that in a meeting on the prairies. because you would essentially put our entire grain industry out of business until we could come up with an alternative. And the alternative currently for I'll take one genetically modified crop, and that would simply be a Roundup Ready grain crop. Roundup Ready, for those of you that don't know what that means, is that the grain has been bred with a gene in it to allow it to be sprayed with Roundup and it doesn't die. Prior to them planting that, instead, they sprayed all those acreages with the Roundup. And I'm not here to talk to either scientific side of that. There's two sides there. Do you want all that Roundup sprayed on the land, or do you want it in the seed? And if you say, I don't want either, I want them to hold all that grain, you know what the answer is. We can't do it that way anymore. So we have to change our system. You're right. The system is broken. It has to be changed. It's a long explanation.